Rome looked perfect from the outside, gleaming temples, gold-covered statues, and soldiers feared across the world. But step behind the palace doors, you would find something else entirely, a darkness crawling under silk sheets. Inside those glittering halls, the women closest to power were not just wives. They were predators. They learned that a single touch could crown an emperor, or bring him to his knees. To them, sex was not just passion. It was a weapon sharper than any blade. These empresses turned their bedrooms into battlefields, and their whispers could change the fate of the empire itself. Every night was a gamble between lust and death, and in the middle of it all was one woman, an empress so feared that even hardened Roman generals refused to speak her name without shivering. They said her appetite had no limit, and her games often ended in screams. You might think you know depravity, but wait until you hear her story. Before we can understand the horrors inside the palace, we have to understand Rome itself. This was not a modest society. Rome thrived on excess the way a drunk thrives on wine. The people demanded more of everything, more food, more blood, more pleasure. At grand feasts, nobles devoured rare meats and flooded their throats with rivers of wine, until they collapsed, only to rise and start again. In the Colosseum, tens of thousands screamed for death, cheering as men were torn apart by beasts, or sliced open by steel. For Romans, cruelty wasn't shameful, it was entertainment. And in the middle of this culture of indulgence stood the empresses. They became symbols of Rome's cravings, dazzling the public by day, and feeding darker appetites by night. Their private lives reflected the city's own addiction. Nothing was ever enough. Rome's heart beat to the rhythm of lust and spectacle, and the women at the top matched it beat for beat. Yet one empress would take this craving far beyond entertainment, into monstrosity. Marriage in Rome was not just about love, it was about survival. Every wedding inside the imperial palace was a gamble, binding families together, or turning them into enemies overnight. An empress was not chosen for beauty alone. She was a piece on the board of dynastic games, and only the sharpest players could last. Those who wore the crown quickly learned that passivity meant death. To endure, they had to become hunters. With a smile, they could disarm a rival. With a whisper, they could doom a senator. They wielded their charm as others wielded swords, striking in places where steel could never reach. Far from victims, these women stalked their prey in the bedrooms, the bathhouses, and the Senate halls alike. Messalina, Agrippina, Julia. Their names still linger like poison in Roman memory, each one a story of seduction, betrayal, and ruthless power. And one of them would shatter every boundary of shame. She staged a contest so obscene, so public, that Rome itself trembled at the scandal. She was young, beautiful, and married to Emperor Claudius, the man who ruled the Roman world. But Messalina was no loyal wife. Behind the walls of the palace, she carried a hunger so vast that gossip said even Rome's busiest brothels couldn't satisfy it. Disguised in wigs and cheap clothes, the empress would slip into the city at night, selling herself beside common prostitute, not for money, but for the thrill of conquest. She turned degradation into a twisted kind of sport. Her most infamous act was a contest that still stains her name. Challenging one of Rome's most celebrated courtesans, Messalina sought to prove who could take the most lovers in a single night. The result was whispered across the empire, feeding Rome's obsession with scandal. To the people, she embodied the empire's own sickness, excess without limit, appetite without shame. Yet in the shadows, some claimed the game did not end with laughter or moans. They murmured of blood spilled before dawn, and of a queen whose lust left corpses in her wake. Sex in Rome was not just about desire, it was about control. Inside the palace, a glance across a banquet table could decide who lived and who died. Empresses learned quickly that seduction was sharper than any dagger, and far more deadly than poison. With a lover's embrace, they gained secrets. With a whispered promise, they bent senators to their will. And with a sudden betrayal, they sent rivals straight to execution. The palace became a battlefield, but no one fought with swords. Here, bodies were the weapons, and passion was the trap. Men who thought they were in command often found themselves pawns. Their ambitions destroyed the moment they yielded to the wrong touch. For the empresses, lust was not pleasure, it was politics played in bed. Every conquest strengthened their grip, every scandal weakened an enemy. And among these women, one figure rose above the rest, Agrippina. She would take the game to its most forbidden edge, wielding even the rumor of incest with her son as a tool of power. Few women in history were as feared, or as cunning, as Agrippina the Younger. Born into Rome's most ruthless dynasty, she grew up watching poison, daggers, and betrayal claim her relatives one by one. She learned early that survival meant striking first. And when she became empress, she wielded charm and cruelty with equal precision. Senators bent beneath her stare, generals bowed to her will, and even her own husband, Emperor Claudius, was said to have fallen victim to her ambition. But it was her relationship with her son, Nero, that made Rome shiver. Whispers spread of a closeness that crossed every boundary, of kisses that lingered too long, of nights spent in chambers no mother should share with her child. Whether rumor or truth, Agrippina used it to control him, binding the young emperor to her will. For a time, she was the true ruler of Rome, the empress who bent an empire through blood and seduction. But power built on fear cannot last forever, and her son, her own flesh and blood, would one day repay her in blood. When Nero finally decided his mother had outlived her usefulness, he planned a death as theatrical as her life. Agrippina was invited onto a splendid boat, a gift from her dutiful son, or so she thought. At sea the trap was sprung. The ceiling collapsed with a thunderous crack, and the vessel split apart, plunging her into the waves. But Agrippina refused to drown. She clawed her way through the wreckage and swam to shore, soaked but alive, her fury burning hotter than ever. Soldiers were dispatched to finish what the sea had failed to do. They stormed her villa, swords drawn, finding the empress weakened but unbroken. Agrippina bared her chest and cried, "Strike the womb that bore Nero." It was defiance to the very end, an empress daring death to face her. Blades pierced her body, silencing Rome's most dangerous woman. Yet her shadow did not die. The whispers of incest, the lessons of manipulation, and the hunger for forbidden pleasures had already twisted Nero's heart. From his mother's blood, darker desires were born. With Agrippina gone, Nero was finally free, but freedom only deepened his madness. The palace became a theater for his cruelty, where every night brought new displays of excess. He raced chariots through the gardens, forced senators to applaud his singing, and indulged in appetites that shocked even Rome's jaded elite. His wives and lovers were trapped in this nightmare, caught between worship and terror. Nero treated marriage as another game of domination. One empress was humiliated before the court, another beaten for defiance, and still others discarded like broken toys. Yet many adapted, reflecting his cruelty back at him, feeding his ego while feeding their own ambitions. Violence, sex, and spectacle blended into a single, endless performance. The palace, once the seat of the empire, became a carnival of corruption, and at its center stood women who learned to survive by embracing the chaos. But survival came at a cost. Among these empresses rose one whose beauty hid a ruthless core. In Nero's shadow, she became both a victim and monster. Poppaea Sabina was not born into the throne room, she clawed her way there. With striking beauty and a mind sharpened like a blade, she seduced her way upward, trading lovers as stepping stones until she reached Nero himself. She knew how to soothe his ego, when to flatter and when to demand. But beneath her graceful smile lived cruelty. Rivals whispered that she urged Nero to murder his own wife, so that she could take her place as empress. Poppaea wielded her beauty like a weapon, bending the emperor to her will. Yet her ambition did not protect her from his violence. In a fit of rage, Nero struck her with a savage kick while she carried his child. The empress collapsed, her unborn baby dying with her. Rome watched in horror as its most dazzling woman was reduced to a tragic corpse. But even in death, Poppaea was not free. Nero's obsession did not end with her final breath. It only grew darker, dragging her body into the realm of the unspeakable. Her death should have closed her story, but with Nero nothing ended cleanly. Whispers spread through Rome that the emperor could not let go of her beauty, even after life had left her body. Rumor claimed he had her corpse preserved, draped in perfumes and fine silks, so he could keep her close in the most unholy way imaginable. Servants whispered of chambers heavy with the stench of rot and roses, of a lifeless queen treated as though she still drew breath. To a people already addicted to scandal, these whispers were irresistible. Rome was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. For a city that blurred the line between spectacle and cruelty, the thought of an emperor indulging in lust beyond the grave felt like the final, grotesque performance. It was excess taken past even the limits of death itself. And yet, Nero's darkness was not unique. Poppaea's story was only one stain in a palace drenched with shame. She was not the only empress tied to scandalous disgrace. Before Messalina and Agrippina, there was Julia, the only daughter of Rome's first emperor, Augustus. She was raised as the symbol of imperial virtue, meant to embody purity and duty. But Julia had no interest in restraint. Instead, she flaunted her appetite in ways that made the empire gasp. At night, she paraded her lovers openly through the forum, turning the sacred heart of Rome into her personal stage of pleasure. Senators, poets, even married men found themselves drawn into her orbit, their names tangled in scandal. Augustus, who had built his rule on strict morals, could not forgive the disgrace. He exiled his own daughter to a barren island, stripping her of wealth, family, and freedom. There, far from the marble halls, Julia withered into ruin, disgraced, forgotten, a ghost of the woman who once ruled Rome's knights. But the whispers did not stop. Even in exile, the people claimed her hunger did not fade. They said Julia's nights were darker than her punishment, filled with secrets Rome dared not record. In the secret chambers of Rome, sex was more than indulgence. It became ritual. By torchlight, masked figures gathered, their identities hidden beneath painted faces. Orgies blurred into performances, where humiliation was part of the spectacle. Some guests were stripped and paraded like slaves, others forced into cruel games that mocked dignity and fed the crowd's laughter. These were nights where shame itself became entertainment. Rumors whispered that torture bled into pleasure, that the line between moan and scream vanished behind closed doors. Chains clinked like music, and silk veils hid cruelties too dark to be spoken aloud in the daylight. The empresses were not always spared. Sometimes they directed the horrors, sometimes they endured them, bound by the same hunger that consumed their court. For Rome, scandal was a feast, and these rituals gave the people something to devour long after the lamps burned out. Yet not every act was remembered. Some rites were so foul, so shameful, that even Rome erased them from its history. Scandal was not just whispered, it was performed. The empire's true stage wasn't always the Colosseum, but the steaming bathhouses and crowded forums, where tongues sharpened faster than swords. Gossip was a weapon, and no empress could escape it. A single rumor of lust or cruelty could travel from the lips of a slave to the ears of senators by nightfall. The truth rarely mattered. What mattered was the thrill of horror, the satisfaction of imagining the mighty dragged into filth. Every glance, every banquet, every private act was exaggerated, twisted, and retold, until it became legend. The people of Rome wanted their empresses larger than life, sinful, dangerous, dripping with shame. And the more lurid the story, the faster it spread. Even when lies outnumbered facts, no one cared. Scandal itself was entertainment, and gossip was the empire's favorite sport. But amid the swirl of exaggeration and rumor, there was one woman whose life needed no embroidery. Her scandals were so dark that no whisper could outdo the truth. Domitia Longina, wife of Emperor Domitian, never shone as brightly as Messalina or Agrippina, but her shadow was just as dangerous. To the public, she appeared as the dutiful empress, draped in jewels at her husband's side. Yet whispers painted her as something darker, an accomplice in his cruelty, a partner in his twisted pleasures. Domitian's reign was marked by paranoia and blood, and rumor claimed Domitia was never far from the chamber where enemies were humiliated, tortured, or quietly erased. Some said she shared in his perversions, others that she silently allowed them to happen, her survival bought by complicity. She learned when to smile, when to flatter, and when to let cruelty take its course. By feeding Rome's hunger for scandal while protecting herself, Domitia endured in a palace that devoured most women whole. Unlike others who burned bright and died fast, she adapted to filth, and made it her shield. Her story shows how empresses didn't just survive Rome's rot, they learned to thrive in it. Their obsession with the gods often bled into its obsession with pleasure, sometimes quite literally. Whispers told of secret fertility rituals hidden deep inside the palace, where empresses and priests gathered in chambers lit only by flickering candles. The air was thick with incense and sweat. Chants echoed against marble walls while naked bodies writhed in rhythm to the prayers. What began as worship twisted into something far more grotesque. Animal blood was poured across altars, smeared onto flesh, mingling with the heat of desire. Some claimed human sacrifices were offered too, slaves or prisoners forced into the spectacle, their cries blending with the feverish chants. The empress, draped in jewels and crimson robes, was said to preside over these unholy ceremonies, her presence blurring the line between goddess, priestess, and predator. For the Romans who craved scandal, these rumors were irresistible. But even hardened gladiators, men who had faced death in the arena, shuddered when they heard the stories of what took place behind those doors. Virginity was more than innocence, it was sacred. Vestal virgins, sworn to chastity, were believed to hold the city's very survival in their hands. Their purity was thought to protect Rome from disaster, making them untouchable in the eyes of the gods. But the more sacred the vow, the greater the temptation to break it. Behind closed doors, whispers told of priestesses lured, bribed, or forced into the beds of powerful men. What was meant to be holy became a playground for lust. The empire's obsession with defilement grew darker with time. For many, the thrill was not in love, but in destroying what was forbidden. And the empresses themselves, cloaked in luxury and untouchable status, often mocked these taboos. They flaunted affairs, corrupted priests, and turned the sacred rules of Rome into scandals for their own amusement. But one empress went further than whispers and games. She didn't just break the law of purity, she reversed it completely. One empress flipped this sacred law upside down. In the palaces of Rome, desire could be twisted into the cruelest form of punishment. For enemies of the throne, death was not always the first sentence. Instead, humiliation came first, through sex turned into spectacle. Men and women alike were dragged into chambers where they were forced to perform in front of sneering audiences, stripped of dignity while laughter echoed around them. The same acts that signified pleasure in private were transformed into weapons of shame in public. Empresses often stood at the center of these performances, directing them as if they were plays. A gesture of the hand could decide who would be paired, who would be mocked, and who would be discarded. Cruelty blended seamlessly with lust, leaving victims broken in body and spirit, while their tormentors felt nothing but satisfaction. For the Roman court, the degradation of others was its own form of entertainment. And for the empresses who mastered these games, every act of perversion was more than desire, it was politics sharpened into power. By the time Rome reached its height, the empire was already rotting from within. The same lust that thrilled its rulers became symbols of its decay. Endless feasts bankrupted treasuries, while orgies and scandals stripped away dignity from the throne. The people, once hardened by war and discipline, grew addicted to spectacle. Blood in the arena, lust in the palace, whispers in the streets. Every new scandal of an empress was another crack in the marble mask of Rome. Sexual horror was not just entertainment, it became a metaphor for the empire itself. Boundaries blurred, honor collapsed, and the hunger for excess devoured every virtue Rome once claimed to uphold. The grandeur of marble temples stood in stark contrast to the filth behind their walls. Historians would later write that Rome did not fall to foreign armies alone. It crumbled because it had consumed itself from the inside out. And yet, even in ruin, the tales did not die. Even in ashes, the stories of its empresses only grew darker. When the empire itself was gone, the empresses lived on, not in stone statues or noble records, but in stories whispered and written down by later generations. Ancient historians, moralists, and gossip-mongers alike took the tales of their lusts and cruelties and stretched them into legend. Messalina's contest grew more obscene in every retelling. Agrippina's whispers of incest grew more poisonous with each new pen. Poppaea's death became darker, her afterlife more grotesque. Some of these accounts were warnings, morality plays meant to remind readers of the dangers of indulgence and desire without limit. Others were pure entertainment, meant to shock, disgust, and thrill. The truth, over time, blurred into myth, until it became impossible to separate fact from scandal. Yet that was the point. The empresses had become symbols of Rome's excess, living nightmares carved into history. And still, their names travel through centuries like curses. The empire is dust, but the women remain. So why do we still whisper these names today? Why do these stories still grip us, centuries after Rome turned to rubble? Perhaps because they touched the darkest corners of human nature. We are fascinated by the mix of sex and horror, by the thought of desire twisted into cruelty, of love weaponized into destruction. The empresses of Rome embodied this fascination, becoming both monsters and mirrors. Through them, we see how power corrupts, how indulgence devours, and how even the most beautiful can become grotesque, when driven by hunger without end. And though empires rise and fall, the pattern repeats. Today, scandals of the powerful still dominate headlines, their private sins consumed as public entertainment. We watch, we whisper, and we cannot look away, just as Romans once crowded the bathhouses to gossip about their empresses. The ruins of Rome may lie silent, its palaces reduced to stone, but the stories have never gone quiet. The names of those women still echo like curses through time. The palaces are ruins, but the screams still echo.